We are starting with the session. Dear participant, welcome you all to the second day of the 15th edition of AISS. Hope you had a very fruitful first day at the summit. Coming to the session, cooperative bank and RRBs are evolving rapidly with newer offerings and are also witnessing wider technology adoption. With this, the cybersecurity related risks are also mounting. In this session entitled Rural Reach Network App and Transaction, we shall be discussing in detail the security and privacy consideration that are being factored in to make rural banking and related operations secure and robust. Now I would like to introduce the panelists for the session. We have with us Mr. Manish Tiwari, Senior VP and Global CISO of Airtel, who will be moderating the session. Mr. Ramesh Kauta, Chief Technology Officer, Nabard. Mr. Rajiv, Vice President, Process Excellence, Madura Microfinance Limited. Now, I would request Mr. Manish Tiwari and other panelists to present their view on the subject.
Thank you so much, Mohit. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Manish Tiwari. I am the Global CISO for Bharti Airtel. And it is my privilege to have two very distinguished panelists and speakers, Mr. Rajiv and Mr. Ramesh. Just to give you a small brief introduction on both these gentlemen. Mr. Rajiv, who's the Vice President for Process Excellence in Madura Microfinance, heads, and actually he spearheads the development, implementation, management of processes at Madura to ensure cutting-edge innovation to drive speed, productivity, risk mitigation, and flexible product introduction. I think it's Rajiv, that's a dream job, and we hope to hear some more salient aspects of your job and how. And particularly with all the aspects related to the rural connectivity and economy that you guys are so closely associated with. My second distinguished panelist is Mr. Ramesh Kauta. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Nabard. He's a senior leader in the industry with proven experience in organizational strategy, build and and has a history of creating self-driven teams that practice inclusive team culture. He operates with a very startup mindset. So Ramesh, this is wonderful because considering that the whole connectivity aspect of the rural areas in the country, which is a very large segment, I think requires a very innovative and a startup mindset, considering that we are at a sub 30% connectivity level. So great to have you. And he has 29 plus years experience in engineering, information technology, and cybersecurity risk management. Welcome once again, Ramesh and Rajiv, and it's a pleasure to have you. So without further ado, I'd just like to set the context. I just want to tell all the participants, this is an area which is very close to my heart. Having served for almost 25 plus years in the Indian Armed Forces, and we, generally have exposure to some of the remotest areas. And, you get to see parts of the country which probably most of the countrymen do not have the privilege. What I want to share with you and to set the context for this conversation are some very, very clear data points where you will understand the challenges and the opportunity and the scope that lies ahead. So first of all, the broadband penetration in India stands at just slightly over 29%. And this is as per a recent disclosure by the government in the parliament. So you have it from the government itself, which basically implies, this is corroborated by the TRAI report of 30th of June, that out of 1,000 users in rural area, only 29.83% actually have access to broadband services. The states with the lowest coverage and connectivity and access are Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, now it's a union territory, and basically Jammu and Kashmir, MP, West Bengal, and Bihar. And so there are challenges around this coverage, in all these aspects. Of course, one would be in many areas it is the low density of population, and definitely when there is a low density of population, there is also the lack of low business viability. But having said that, a very large percentage of our country, if you see the geographical landmass, would fall into remote areas, jungle, deserts, mountains. And we do have people living in these areas, and if these people do not have access to modern services, they are basically being left out of the digital revolution that is actually happening, and the transformation that is happening around us. I would also like to share that the government has taken a lot of initiatives, and one primary amongst that is the BharatNet project. This is this very ambitious project involves back in a very phased manner in bringing connectivity to all the gram panchayats in the country. There are, as per my data point, there are approximately 2.5 lakh gram panchayats in the country, and one of the initiatives under this was the launch of the GSAT-11 satellite around 2 years ago. It works in the Ka band. It's in the geostationary satellite. So, and primarily the aim was that it should be able to use the 14 GB connectivity for access. However, I also want to point out that look, there are advantages of a geostationary satellite, which basically means coverage. However, with a geostationary satellite, the latency would be obviously negatively impacted as compared to a low Earth satellite. So a low Earth satellite would be somewhere, in the range of 1,000 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. The disadvantage with the low Earth satellite is that obviously its coverage is less, but it provides very good connectivity. And hence, the only thing with the low Earth satellite is that you will have to launch a larger number of satellites to ensure adequate coverage, or at least coverage in areas which are defined as rural or remote. I'd also like to share with you a very promising and a positive data point. In the recent past, particularly in the last 1 year, the number of rural internet users has increased very substantially. And this is a report which has been published by the Internet and Mobile Association of India, IAMAI, which has said that for the first time, the number of rural users has gone up to 227 million as compared to 205 million in the cities. Now, this is a IAMAI report that I am quoting. But one very salient point that they have brought out is that increase in rural areas is largely driven by women users. That's a very interesting point. That a very, very substantial increase in the number of remote or rural users, and even in that, a substantial portion of adoption being driven by women users. Just goes to show that look, if we were able to provide the necessary infrastructure as a nation, if we are able to provide the necessary access and connectivity to our rural areas, sky is the limit. And the amount of transformation it can, mean for our country is absolutely phenomenal. Now, there are multiple ways in which connectivity outreach can be done to all our rural areas. It could be fiber, which incidentally is very, very expensive. Mobility, which also requires a decent amount of infrastructure and is also expensive. And it is driven by, again, financial aspects. Then, of course, as I mentioned, there is the satellite-based, access to internet. It could be a geostationary, or it could be a low Earth satellite with its pros and cons. Then, of course, we have the TV white space, which is basically the UHF frequency band, typically forming between, if I correctly remember, 470 to 590 megahertz. And of course, there is the connectivity that has been technically verified and proven over the high tension power cables. However, that technology is still, there are lots of implementation issues around that. But just to mention, since I mentioned the other options, that is also there. The one aspect that I will like to talk, I mean, I'm mindful of the fact that we are all cybersecurity professionals and we are in a DSCI conference. So the one aspect that I haven't mentioned and I would like to sort of mention is that, look, when we increase connectivity in a very big way, and this is what the pandemic actually has done. It has increased the adoption of internet services in a very, very big way. Students are doing classes remotely. Women are purchasing items, online through, even groceries are being purchased online. The adoption of payment wallets and online banking has gone up substantially. People are resorting to online digital services and have done so in a very big way. And there is a very significant population who till now was not using or was not comfortable with using online, transactions or online digital transactions, but they have adopted to it very, very seamlessly. With this is a very large population which till now was not using internet very actively for online transactions or online purchases, and hence there is a very, very significant portion of the population in the country which may have adopted digital services but is not necessarily aware of the risks that come with using such services, and hence that is something that we need to take into account. So with that, I will go to both my panelists. The context I want to set for today's conversation is cyber security only exists because of cyberspace. You cannot have cyber security if there are no digital services, there are no applications, there are no services. So cyber security exists because of the need for services, need for such connectivity at all 7 layers of the OSI model, no doubt about it. So this conversation that I wish to drive with my two esteemed panelists is as much about connectivity, our rural economy, but in a secure manner. So with that, I will like to open the forum with my first question to Mr. Rajiv. Rajiv, in your opinion, what is the most viable option? I give a context. I talked about multiple. As a company, you are very, very, very connected with the rural outreach. So you know and understand the practical challenges on ground. So what, in your opinion, is the most viable option for rural connectivity in India? And from a cybersecurity perspective, since you are connected with a rural retail customer at an individual level, what are the trends that you are seeing, particularly in the last 8 months, with respect to cyber risks and frauds, and what more can be done in order to educate our masses, particularly those in the rural areas? We've asked you 3 questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Manish, and thanks to this DSCI and NASCOM for the opportunity to be among an esteemed panel. Very pertinent questions, Mr. Manish. So we are in the completely rural-focused microfinance industry. We don't operate in urban or semi-urban areas. We are completely in rural. 475 branches across the country in 7 states, in very far-flung areas, because we believe in being closer to the customer where we can serve them. And we only lend to women, right? All our customers are only women, and we only lend to women, microfinance, small ticket size loans. So what we have seen that evolve over the years in the digital, like what I call as a digital jump. So we have gone from desktop to laptop to mobile and all that, but they have directly gone to the mobile. So their usage of the mobile has started in a very big way. So even though we still see that the majority of them use the feature phones, but still we see a sizable amount of portion moving towards the smartphone also. That again brings up its own challenges of cybersecurity and privacy issues, which they are not aware of the first step. But how do we reach those people, especially in those far-flung areas of the remotest parts of the country, is something very challenging for us because we need to be connected. Our entire process is digital end-to-end, right from onboarding the customer to disbursing the loan and servicing the loan. So what we have to do is to make sure that we have applications which are capable to work in a both online and offline mode. Because when our sales officer goes to acquire a customer, she may be in a very remote place where we will not even have the connectivity at all. But still we need to capture her information and then bring it back to a place where there is sufficient connectivity, where it automatically syncs to the server. But that should be seamless as far as the customer is concerned. She should not be worried whether if there is connectivity or not connectivity. So typically the connectivity is a challenge, but we are seeing that it's definitely improving with service providers coming into across all the states of the country. It is definitely improving, and we are able to operate from all the branches that we have. But there are a lot of branches where we only have the privilege of having a data dongle, right? We don't have a broadband or other types of connectivity available, but still we are able to design applications which are secure as well as able to be compatible with such modes of operation. We are able to take it further. What also we have seen the customer transform is adopt more of digital services. Okay, so especially during this COVID time, they have come back and asked us. Previously, it has been almost 100% cash transactions of paying us back. But now they have come back and asked us, like, so do you accept through UPI-based payments? So how do I send money? So where do I send money? So that is what something which we have also been educating. So we call it as digitally enabling or being phygital. Or we are physically present with them, but also enable them to be digital in the way they interact with us. And we kind of enable them to teach them to do things. Right? They may not be able to do it on their own, coming from that kind of a background and very less exposure to the internet and the technology. But we have been able to guide them and teach them how do they do the UPI-based payments, how do they leverage the government schemes that are available. And there is a lot that the government is doing which can reach to them through such platforms which are like we are very privileged to be part of and we use it, but it's going to be very useful for them also. So that's how it's a slow and a steady progression and a graduation. But we strongly believe that these people will quickly come over that digital gap that is there between the urban and the rural, where they are able to adopt such technologies much faster and also develop and adopt the latest technologies like UPI or whatever based payments which are available to them. So that's where we are seeing it over here.
Oh, wonderful. I think you covered it very well. Ramesh, leaving where Rajiv actually, closed his inputs, can you share with all the audience particularly when it comes to rural users, in your perspective, what are the concerns around end user privacy? And you're aware that we have the country is fast moving towards a data protection bill. And we will have it sooner rather than later, at some point in time. So what, according to you, particularly from a rural user perspective, are concerns around protection of privacy and security for rural end users, and what more can be done for educating and protecting rural users? Considering that many of them, as Rajiv rightly pointed out, are first-time adopters of technology, and they have moved directly to, they have directly moved on to the mobile revolution. They haven't gone through a desktop or a laptop. They have straight away gone to a mobile revolution. And I would also request if you get your perspective on the last aspect of what can be done, because particularly for rural users, language is a major issue. So, they are, Hindi or English may not be their language of choice, or they may not even be conversant. Many or most of them would be conversant only in the local regional language. Yes, Ramesh, over to you.
Thanks, Manish. And again, first of all, I would like to thank DSCI for having me in the prestigious panel. And again, as Raju rightly said, this is a topic of interest for all of us, as we come from rural backgrounds earlier in our lives, and then we have seen the transformation, how things changed. Both of you touched upon how the young population already jumped from a nowhere to a digital or mobile platforms and how things are working. Just before going into the actual aspects of it, I would like to touch base something. The financial inclusion actually has taken a long leap into the rural areas through various programs driven by the government. We call it the Kisan Credit Card or PJDY or PMGY. There are multiple of them, including the direct benefit transfers, eliminating the middleman and providing the bank accounts and enabling them to work with those kind of banking environment very easily. Now, this has reached them to kind of get the financial benefit, but again, at the same time, because as you alluded, the backgrounds of them being not literate in terms of the languages or English more specifically, they have a challenge in terms of dependency on their own people or outsiders to help them out. And more specifically, we see that the rural population at this point of a time has a more percentage of older people who really struggle a bit in terms of how to adopt these technologies and how to go it. They independently cannot handle it. They may be able to talk, but definitely they cannot do their interactive operations on those systems. So obviously it's a challenge for them as a pull and a push kind of a thing. They'll be able to receive the messages, but again, they need dependent on someone to help. Or somewhere, I think, even if they can read it, they don't know how to respond because of the crispy nature of the messages, the way it's being delivered to them. It's difficult for them to understand. So the concern what these people generally come across this thing is, if they give the hand over the phone to someone else, and what will happen? Because we have seen a lot of the cyber threats and hacks, where by asking the passwords or sharing the passwords, their accounts being kind of money being taken away from them, or maybe using a different way of operations into that. Because they are not aware of how to set up the passwords, how to set up the protection controls in those areas. So that being one of the bigger concerns where they have it. And some of these kind of systems, like including, though some of the young population are able to adopt these mobiles and other technologies, they're still not aware of it, what information is being shared with these other e-commerce platforms or various tools. And they don't know how the data is being used against them or for them. We have seen a lot of these cyber crisis cases where there's reporting saying that, okay, look, you got a payout back or maybe credit, please click on the link. And once they click on the link, they're suddenly realizing that they're losing money. Of course, it's not only happening in the rural, it's happening in the urban areas as well. But that's where I think they see a difficulty in terms of how to collaborate, how to kind of communicate between the platforms and systems. Now, the way to go forward, I would see in this thing to kind of help or minimize this is bringing a kind of a controlled environment where the information can be delivered and shared. So, for example, most of the apps can be downloaded from any of those Google Play or iOS, and they get the system in place. People are free to use it. But at the same time, if they really require transactions and on a financial inclusion process or the government transactions or banking things, they may need to know how to connect their account with either device where it's actually securely kind of linked. So that way what happens is anything which is coming across is linked to a particular system and a process that will eliminate any kind of what we call dubious transaction being happening it up. Today, for learn, it may be easy to do an OTP, entering it, removing it, making a connectivity could be easier. But in those segments, it's basically required an authentication basis. But then again, I briefly talk about, maybe we'll look at more later, is one of the concerns there is they cannot really go over fingerprinting, because even if it is the easiest thing, some of them have difficulty in giving a thumb impressions because the thumb impression does not look appropriate because of the nature of work, what they do, outside they are in. They are not the kind of religious stuff. So obviously there is a need for improving the technology and somewhere getting into that. It could be tied to the individual along with the device or some kind of a mechanism where the dedicated services are given and maybe a related ID versus kind of giving authenticated users or vendors are onboarded for them so that the financial transaction can be used much more beneficially, easily, so that there's no confusion in terms of whether I'm doing a spurious one or the right one, and that can be done. It's a high-level thinking process. That's the way of going forward, I would think. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Ramesh. That was a very, very nicely articulated point of view. Rajiv, coming back to you, and again, I am basically taking on from where Ramesh left, right? So I have two specific questions of you, and I'm not asking for your company's strategy. That is not my purpose, but I'm saying from a larger perspective. this aspect that I touched upon and Ramesh also mentioned is the relevance of the application, particularly with respect to communicating in the right language with the rural population, because most of them many of them would not even be comfortable in Hindi, leave aside English. So what more can be done because obviously this requires applications by service providers in the country and the outreach in the local language. From your perspective, is enough being done? What is being done? What more can be done? And so yeah, over to you.
Yeah, very valid point, Manish. So, as you rightly said, right, not everybody across the country is not comfortable in Hindi. We have seen that when we travel across the rural areas, and even our own staff are also not very comfortable in Hindi when you go deep into some of, like, say, Karnataka or somewhere else. They are not comfortable. So they need to see and be easy to read something which they already know, like, say, local language, which has to be there. Definitely, there has to be a lot of leaps and bounds in terms of the way that the applications or the mobile apps, which is the one which they are accessing, be available in their local language, and also be very easy to read. See, there's a very stark contrast that we found between the way that an urban user reads the mobile app in terms of the fields and the icons and all that, and the way that the rural customer reads that mobile app, right? So she's not used to very complex way of handling through an app. It should be very simple in few clicks, easy language, more of audio-based feedback, right? So audio-based feedback is also in their local language is going to be very, very helpful for them, so that they understand something very quickly and easy, even though they're not able to read it very well or very properly. And all platforms, we see that they're slightly moving towards that area of giving multiple languages options. But still, we have a long way to go where more and more service providers have to adopt into that language, and which will be of very great help to bridge that gap that is there of the digital divide or something, if we can call it, where they have to adopt local languages also, where they can make a lot of services of the government also be able to reach them much quicker and much faster and in a more efficient way. So that is very, very important, and that's the right way to go.
So does it make sense? Yes.
I just want to add one more thing for Rajiv, what he said. Now that most of the families are believing that English is the only way to learn our education, but somewhere even the local language disconnect is also happening there. Even if you have good applications, reaching out to them is also a problem, because the younger generations, younger population cannot read the local language. They will not be able to translate. So as Rajiv rightly said, voice is the right thing for them to go ahead.
Absolutely, I concur with that. Now, notwithstanding that, the ground reality still is that there is a very large segment of the population which is not comfortable in either English or Hindi. From a risk management perspective, if we have to educate this rural population, right, in cyber risk, and what is it that they need to be, basics of cyber risk management at the individual level. Do you think, Ramesh, it makes sense for the industry or the government in partnership with the industry to run awareness programs, and also in regional languages or in a manner where the outreach of this sensitization can be increased to the maximum and hence reduce cyber risk to these first-time adopters of digital services in rural India? And if so, what is your suggestion? How could it be done?
Yeah, I'll take a first start. Maybe Rajiv can follow. One thing which I would actually, I mean, always keep thinking about this kind of a thing. Now, the way we fly in the aeroplane, every time the air hostess gives all the instructions which are their safety instructions. I mean, despite you being a frequent traveler, still you are told what to be done. So I think every time when you take a service or a product, maybe that's where I think, as Rajiv said, a voice or a simple message to be delivered to the end user saying that, okay, don't share your OTP, don't do those things, and these are 4 or 5 things which they may have to hear and then press an acknowledgement kind of a thing before they starting the service. With that way, what happens is a timely thing, they would get an indication, yeah, these are something I need to remember. Maybe first time, second time, he might miss it, but eventually you get to practice saying that, okay, these are the 5 minimum things you should not be doing it. So that is something, I mean, different, but every time you buy a phone or download an app, it must be mandatory saying that this gives a messages to them saying that, okay, this is a simple 5-step thing, you need to do it. These are do's and don'ts, and then kind of a thing would help. Plus, timely kind of an acknowledgement to the individuals. I know it's masses, it's very difficult to do it, but I think there is the cyber section kind of a programs driven by DSCI and others should really kind of take a handhold in terms of volunteering it. In some of programs what Nabard delivers, we also have got kind of a local people who are kind of driving it. Maybe we can leverage those kind of groups, like as you mentioned, the self-help groups or the group leaders. They should also be educated to teach their own groups in a timely manner every quarterly or sometime, so that this the learning will go down into their places, so that we can see a start of a culture being built into their lives.
I completely agree. Rajiv, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, one great example of a persistent audio message is happening during the COVID season is like whenever you try to call somebody, you keep on keeping that, right? It's still not stopped, and good for that. Everybody's got that message, right? So that whether you like it or not, sometimes it doesn't even allow to shut it in between. So that kind of a persistent messaging has to be there, and it's more easily driven by a voice message in a local language, no better reach than that. Yes, there are text messages that the bank send, like don't share your PIN and all that, but text reach is still limited and a lot of people don't see it, and typically we have seen in the feature phones that you have a limitation in also the number of text messages that can be stored in the phone, right? In the practical context that we have seen where customers complain to us, no, I didn't get a receipt for my payment because she couldn't read or she couldn't store that in the phone itself. So such persistent messages have to be there. That is point number one. Point number two, the leveraging of the various societies and the NGOs who are already working among them, who when they see the digital move coming up and happening through various schemes of the government and the other reaches of the industry that is happening, they should also contribute in terms of saying, educating that masses, saying that, hey, how can you be more secure? Understand what are the privacy privileges they have, especially that you rightly put it, Manish, in terms of the data protection bill, gives a lot of privileges for the customer to protect their data. So that is something which it has to be very, very key, and that has to continue on a longer term also.
So Rajiv, I want this perspective from both of you. And Ramesh, I'll go with you first, and Rajiv, after that, I would like you also to answer the same question. There has been some recent talk, if I correctly remember. So today, typically, as you rightly said, that a very large section of this rural population has directly jumped, leapfrog to the mobile, to the mobile platform. They haven't gone through that laptop and the other traditional things. Now, having said so, we know that all mobile, driven transactions are driven by applications, mobile applications. And as of today, if you are using an Android, then you go to the Google Store. If you're using an Apple device, you generally go to the Apple Store. The number of Apple users in the country, obviously being a much more expensive device, is very, very less. A very, very large, close to 98%, I would say, are Android users in the country. Various flavors of makes and model, but they would be, I would say, Android users. What is your opinion, Ramesh, on particularly for critical applications which are driven either by the government or within the country, specifically for Indian users? What's your perspective? What's your opinion that a separate app store, and you're also aware that there have been a lot of supply chain security related issues with this recent disclosure around the SolarWinds issue where updates from the OEM itself were responsible. So, what do you trust at the end of the day? The end user trusts what he gets from a bona fide source. And today, typically for an Android application user, you will go across to the Google Store and download an application from there. What's your opinion, Ramesh, on is there any case for having a separate government-driven probably a government-driven application store for government-related applications or India-specific applications, which are made mandatory?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'm finished. I think I'm glad I'm in this panel and I am connecting with the right mindset people who are thinking like me. I'm very much excited about it. Now, yes, I think there is really a need for it because I myself personally kind of feel that kind of held hostage with these two, basically, I'll say stores. But eventually, I think government is coming up with initiatives, something called NODE, the National Open Digital Environment kind of a thing. So what we can do, I would essentially suggest is these applications should be given hosting in these areas with a particular ID kind of a thing, where the ID is of the application or something kind of registered, so that it cannot be fooled. I mean, it cannot be replicated or maybe used by others, unless this is authenticated in this particular government environment or an agency for that matter. It doesn't have to be only government, because the moment government comes, people think differently. A trusted agency can be given a trusted score, and then maybe an app should be hosted into that, so that people can be able to download and use it as they want. And even if you develop it in the Android or an OS, I mean, end of the day, it's an exe file with kind of any variations. They should be kind of linked into that. And of course, if I'm an user, I may have to register my mobile, mobile number, I would say device, so that my device can be authenticated to the application and I can feel confident, secure. All the applications, like in terms of the government applications and some of those banking applications, what we use it for our rural populations, can all, I think, should all move into that space, so that they're all kind of secure and etc. Now I don't have to worry about other applications which I don't know. I mean, I don't know if someone willingly want to go into a social media or something else, that's your concern. But when the services are being delivered, the rural reach need to be included in the financial inclusion. What you suggested is the right approach. The basic solution is, yes, we can embed a particular ID into that one, and that ID can be included. And if the ID is not validated by us, it can never come into my phone. Maybe you can call it a containerization kind of a thing. We can create one and then maybe secure it such a way, saying that all these things are kind of fearlessly transacted safely, and other things is a different environment. We can need to keep them separate. I think it's the right way to go forward, Manish.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah, sorry. So to add on to that, right? So that's the concept which I was also moving towards, is that a trusted store kind of a thing, right? A trusted store from where you download with certain authentication, which makes sure that okay, the user is also authenticated, validated, is correct, and the app also is like trusted. It does not infringe my data to somewhere else, and even though it may be in XYZ devices, but still it does not give out the data to anyone, or someone, any of the other apps running can also not take out the data from whatever it is interacting with also. I think that is the way to go, because I don't think we can control the platform, but how do we control a container, like how Ramesh rightly put it? Can I control a container within that and do it? So that's the way.
And any role, Rajiv, that you feel blockchain. So there are two aspects to managing security. One is, of course, security of the application, whether the application per se is secure by itself and doesn't introduce a vulnerability. And of course, second is securing the supply chain, securing the entire, the whole process of securing the source, so that there is a confidence level. Do you think blockchain can play any role in this?
Absolutely. I think blockchain is emerging and it is getting in the right direction in terms of authentication, right? So, for example, let us say that the app has to be validated with an Aadhaar validation, for example. So today, instead of sending up a request and response or OTP and all that, so can a blockchain ecosystem validate that and say, yes, this is a valid user, this is a valid app, and everybody exists in that supply chain, and then it comes on to the particular mobile device or whichever platform, and then someone can use it. So that is something which is going to be the way forward in terms of authentication. Authentication is something blockchain is going to play a very key role.
Yeah, I just want to add. Sorry, Manish, I just want to add one more thing what Raju said. In fact, I know Mahindra themselves use a blockchain technology for their export-oriented agricultural deliveries, which actually comes with a blockchain. That means saying that when I'm giving a particular, say, Madhya Pradesh tobacco or something, it actually goes with the same brand and location. So blockchain is already there, implemented it, and of course at a different level, but I'm sure, yeah, it can be leveraged in other segments as well.
All right. Guys, we have one question from somebody called Buddha. I'll just read the question as it is. What do you think about mini secure clouds in the rural areas, which can talk to major cloud on and off? Probably what they are talking about is there are a lot of applications which are run by government in their data centers. So that could be referred to as obviously government-driven cloud, but something which is able to communicate with applications or obviously which are running on the major cloud players. Rajiv, I think one is I think you can to start with you can take that query. After which, Ramesh, I would like your response also on the same thing. And this is basically about largely about cloud adoption. Obviously, it makes sense. Adoption of cloud technologies is not there's no rocket science around that. But I think here the key point is that there are a lot of the government-driven cloud. A lot of applications which are running from government-driven data centers, and obviously a large number of applications today and services which run from on major cloud service provider platforms. Their interoperability and the risk out of that. Rajiv, over to you first.
Sure. So I think it's more towards a kind of a concept of edge computing, right? Where can the computing power be at more at the edge, nearer to the user than on a cloud somewhere which is much far away, which makes a lot of sense, especially with the connectivity challenges. So there can be hubs in the rural areas where the user can first get routed to that, get service for certain things, and only for certain things he goes to the much larger cloud from the various service providers, which is perfectly fine. And also, when we talk about government kind of a cloud with a lot of controls and all that, major providers do have, especially in the abroad countries, they have specific government spaces for in the cloud itself, which have their own additional controls, which can also come into our space. I think we can extend that to more of rural areas where it can be more secure, as well as also meet the faster response time without cut down on the latency and enable to serve the rural sector better.
Thank you, Rajiv. Ramesh, you would like to add?
I agree with Rajiv. And again, at least as I know, some of these states already developing their own tier 2 IT hubs, and so their data centers are also likely to be coming up in those areas. So in fact, it actually aligns with what Rajiv said. They are going to be their edge computing, and then they will be able to leverage the infrastructure capabilities and services. And more specifically for the rural areas, the need will be more than financial going forward. It's their product selling as well as the environmental updates will be required. So that's the way to go forward. However, there's one caveat. We also need to be sure, saying that as the panelist, the member asked it, what happens if we're combining all the data into another cloud? That is something we need to be careful, because that's where the privacy and the consent of the individual users comes. Maybe we'll not be taking all the data to somewhere else, pseudonymize, or maybe take it in a different way, so that we can give the confidence to the end user, saying that yes, your data is safe. I'm only using the kind of derived data, not the individual data itself.
Thank you, Ramesh. That was very well. In the interest of time, and actually we've already thought, but there is one question that I really want to ask, because it is another project which is very important for our country. It's after my heart, and it can play a very important role, for ensuring the security of users, also for ensuring the security of critical services, not only in rural but also in urban areas. I'm referring to the Aadhaar program. I'm also mindful of the fact that there are legal issues around that, wherein there are some court directives on that issue. So I will not transgress that line. But Rajiv, first to you, since microfinance and particularly transactions, what in your opinion, what more can be done? How can and how Aadhaar can, because we talked about security, and typically we are talking about online security. How, in your opinion, can Aadhaar actually take securing the rural user to the next level?
No, Aadhaar is very important, and it has really helped us, at least in our microfinance industry, even though, as you rightly said, there are certain limitations which has kind of curbed us the way that we used to use Aadhaar. But otherwise, it has been a very, very important aspect. We can validate the customer identity and all the details with respect to her very, very clearly. And we can also control the risk that is happening on our side also, because the same data goes across to all the credit bureaus and every other aspect. So that is also covered. But another important aspect is that Aadhaar is so controlled and protected that the customer can also feel that we are not, her data is not going out anywhere, because we are very well regulated, right? We come right under the purview of RBI, and RBI is very clear. They come do our audits and make sure that we are not sharing any of the customers' private data or the Aadhaar data. And now there is even more regulations where we are not even able to collect Aadhaar data. But that one link is very helpful in terms of getting the mobile number link, so she can also leverage the mobile number and use it for that. So she is identified, at least for us a customer, she is identified across all the areas, and the control is there for her also to make sure that her data is not used improperly by us as the end company. But at the same time, all services are given to her much quicker, right? Because we know that it's a validated identity, and we can give the turnaround time for her is like much quicker, and it's a great initiative. Of course, we hope that a lot of things will get removed and we have the much better access to that data.
So I agree, Rajiv. To start with, Aadhaar also ensures a proper and effective KYC, know your customer, or basically help establish the identity that this is the person who is stating that he is, and it's a confirmation he is who he states he is. And this can basically very effectively ensure that the government programs are reaching the right people. In the case of the banking sector, it can basically help prevent a lot of fraud, particularly for customers who are not very net savvy, who are not very cyber security conscious. It can help protect that very slightly less educated and not so digitally enabled person, and basically protect them. So there are a lot of benefits of Aadhaar. Yes, there have been concerns raised, but I think the way Aadhaar has protected the data, particularly biometric, does not go out. You see, yes, as far as your Aadhaar card is concerned, the number is there. That's fine, but your biometric does not go out. So for critical transactions, like for example today for pensioners, if they have to go today, they have two processes. One is a manual process, government pensioners. The other one is Aadhaar enabled, where you have to actually give your biometrics to prove that you are basically who you are. Ramesh, on the same question, would you like to add something to what Rajiv has said with respect to Aadhaar enablement for ensuring the security of the not digitally enabled user?
Yeah, I think the Aadhaar is definitely the right way to go. And again, there is an alternately available is the virtual ID is also being available. So basically, what is required is if you use a virtual ID, the privacy of the individual also will kind of go away, because this is pseudonymized and people cannot recognize. So the programs and tags can be identified with the virtual IDs, which will take care of it as authenticate and give the kind of confidence, and the privileges can be brought down very heavily. And I think unless you have one single identity, people can misuse it, and we have seen it. The government has been doing a great job in terms of controlling that through DBT and other stuff. So obviously, without any unique ID, it's difficult for anyone to establish who is the right thing, and maybe the duplication of services, deliveries cannot be mitigated. So if Aadhaar usage is a restriction, maybe there is a virtual ID can be created among us, which will also take care of the similar experience.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. That was very insightful. We have reached, unfortunately, the end of our session. In fact, we have overshot by 10 minutes. But this is a topic which is very important to the country. And I would actually call it enabling rural India safely. How do you ensure that rural India does not get left out in the digital and social revolution which is happening in the country, but it happens in a safe manner, so that the end user in the rural India, when they get enabled, they get so they do so in a safe and secure manner. And how do we basically not only enable them but also educate them? How do we promote an ecosystem that basically brings the digital revolution? First of all, connectivity in whatever means. And I know there is one question that we have not been able to, in the interest of time, as to the public-private partnership, as to how the government and the private industry can collaborate in first taking connectivity to the rural masses. Everything else comes later, including security. So, or rather, I would say it comes inbuilt. but no connectivity, nothing else. There is no application, there is no security. The first and fundamental requirement is how do we take connectivity to the most remotest of areas of country and ensure that there is 100% coverage. We have not been able to discuss that in the interest of time, but just to summarize, I think one aspect is, yes, connectivity outreach to the entire country is the need of the hour. We need to enable our rural population. Enablement of the rural population will ensure that they do not get left out in the digital revolution that is happening. Government services and critical services, whether by government or by private sector, reach them in a cost-effective manner. All this happens along with the security sensitization, so that this population does not get left out or does not become even more vulnerable or fall to cyber frauds. There are lots of technologies which can be adopted. There are a lot of processes and means and mediums that can be adopted. And last, we also spoke about India-specific app store. We talked about how Aadhaar can enable. So I think all in all, in my opening talk, I talked about the government initiatives, particularly around the BharatNet, and the fact that we have a satellite program, and just the first in the series of many satellites which are going to be launched to bring connectivity to the rural masses. But definitely we need to look beyond that. We need to probably look at low Earth orbit satellites also to improve the latency, because most of the current generation applications would require good connectivity, good speeds to improve the user experience, particularly if we are talking about children attending. Even if we are talking about children attending live classes, currently in the pandemic crisis, we can't afford a high latency. If we are talking about remote monitoring by, let's say, a doctor, I'm not saying we require 5G speeds for that, but we definitely cannot. We need better this thing. If you are doing online financial transactions, we can't have a high baud rate, Rajiv, and you know that better than anybody else. You need a good connectivity. So that is what I think as a nation we need to think of, how to enable our rural masses, and we do securely and safely. Thank you so much, Ramesh. Thank you so much, Rajiv. It was a pleasure having both of you to hear your perspective, and thank you to the audience that's been listening. Back to the DSCI control team. Mohit, if you're there, please take over.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for such a fruitful discussion, and I hope that the participant must have gained from it. Thank you, sir.
Yep. Thanks, Mohit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mohit.
Bye,
Bye, Rajiv.
Bye. Thank you.